We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and welcome to yet another edition of Free Association Radio. I'm Robert Phoenix. I'm your host, guide, navigator for the next 120 minutes. And today's show will be filled with tales of the incredulous and confessions and narratives that are going to blow your mind. So our first guest today is the lovely Sacha Claire-Christie, who is from England, and you can find her on her website, sachacchristie.com. But she's also involved in a number of really interesting acts of public disclosure, support, you name it. She's a one-stop shop for people who have had the unfortunate or strange encounter with the third kind. We're going to talk about that with her shortly. And in the second hour of the show, I'm going to bring on my old friend from my Mondo 2000 days, Are You Serious, a.k.a. Ken Goffman, and we're going to be discussing the life and times of Timothy Leary. Ken just put out just had a 130-page book published by Futique, which is the group that is responsible for Timothy Leary's archives and all things related to the most famous psychonauts of the 20th century. So we'll talk to Ken about it's a really great read, by the way, and you can download it for free. The link is on the show page. You can also buy a copy if you want to support Ken and Futique, but I downloaded it, and it moves quickly. I started this morning, and I'm already up to page 71. And we're going to get into Tim Leary's life. He's a controversial figure. Ken knew him well, and well enough to be part of his biographical team. And we're going to get into Tim's life and talk about Ken's relationship, or Are You Serious, if you know him from that alter ego, his relationship with Tim and Tim's life in general. Okay, so let's not waste any further time. And let's step into an alternate dimension with our friend, Miss Sacha Claire-Christie. Let's see if we can bring her on here. Are you there?
Hi, Robert.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great, thank you.
Good. Well, thanks for being on the show at such short notice. And I've wanted to have you on for quite a while. So we met on Facebook, like a number of people do these days. And I was always blown away by your graphics and your attitude. You're whip smart, and you're definitely an outsider. So I was intrigued about who you are and what you were doing, and I kind of climbed into your rabbit hole a little bit, and I found out that through my friend Ellis Taylor, that you really kind of at the center of this movement in England and maybe the world over to kind of really air out what's going on in this whole extraterrestrial UFO experience. And here in this country, obviously, we have Stephen Greer and the Disclosure Project. We talk about that a little bit later. But I found out that you were really kind of this, sort of centralizing, organizing figure in this world in England. So I wanted to have you on. I wanted to find out more about you and more about your work. So thanks for coming on. And
thank you for asking me.
Yeah, let's kind of start at the beginning. And on your website, you talk about this experience that you had in the Welsh countryside, which changed your life. Do you want to start there?
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, in the winter, holiday cottages in Wales are really cheap. So we used to go off because it's dismal, isn't it? So it's like something to do. So we used to go off to Wales quite often. And we hired this cottage this particular weekend. And we got there on the Friday. On the Saturday, everyone was really tense. It was a really weird atmosphere. It was a strange day. People were falling out. There was this undercurrent going on. It wasn't very nice. But, so by the evening, it got to kind of 7 o'clock-ish, I think. I decided I was going to go have a bath. It was completely dark outside, and it had been raining all day. It was particularly miserable. And I'd gone upstairs to have a bath, and everyone was downstairs. And that everyone consists of my partner at the time, Steve, his sister, Danya. She'd taken her son with her, Joseph, who was 4 at the time, and their uncle John was there as well. He was in his 50s. I took my son with me, Louis, so there was quite a group of us, 4 adults, 2 children. So, I'm upstairs, and Steve shouts, Sacha, come here, come outside. And, so I ran downstairs, went outside with him, and he's pointing off in the distance, and I couldn't see anything. It was just thick cloud cover, and the cloud was really low, and I'm looking in the dark. I couldn't see anything, and then I saw a little flicker of light inside the clouds. So I said, it's lightning. He said, it's not, watch it. So when I pinpointed it, I kept watching. It kept coming back on and on again and again. It was moving off towards our right, and it was miles away. And I was like, oh, yeah, wow, look at that. And then it stopped moving off to our right and then started moving towards us in this sort of zigzag fashion. I don't know why it moved like that. I don't know if it's something to do with the gravitational ball effect that people talk about, because, in Wales there are a lot of valleys, so I don't know if it was following a valley, but it didn't move in a straight line. It didn't move quickly. It took ages. And eventually it was kind of in over the field that was just in front of the house. And by the time this had gone on, I don't know how much time had passed. It's hard to recall. I was over half an hour. So we were all outside by then because we called everybody out. And this craft is in the clouds. It's only just in the clouds. And the clouds are so low. And I just, till last year, I didn't know why the clouds were so low. And I thought I might have over-exaggerated something in my mind and made them, because it was such an intense experience. But when I went back for the first time last year, we were on top of Berwyn Mountain, so we were actually driving through the clouds when we went to this last visit last year. So that's how high up we were. And so this craft is just inside the clouds. It's rotating this light, and then it moves very slowly, so slowly that I don't even really recall it moving, but it became up. So it was right over the top of us. And the craft was at least 60 feet in diameter and had a central white circle of light. And from that, there were spaced lines of light coming out, which were rotating. It kind of looked like, if you look at a mushroom, when you pull the stalk off, you've got the circle and you've got the fins going out. Mm-hmm. Kind of like, it always reminded me of a mushroom or a kind of jellyfish, because when it was in the clouds, obviously the clouds have different densities. So it was like mashed potato. It was like it was inside mashed potato. It looked lumpy, so the lights rippled. But I know that was an effect of the thickness of the clouds. So we were all stood underneath it, and my sons stood right next to me at this point. He was quite scared, and we've been trying to convince them that it was like just lights from a tractor reflecting from the underneath of the clouds, or saying anything so we could stay out for a bit longer. Then from behind us came this strobe light, and I turned around and went, oh, look, there's another one. And everybody turned around and looked, and there was a sphere on the ground which had come down and underneath some trees silently. Impossible, you know, you would say it was impossible, but this sphere was, I would say, maximum 9 feet in diameter. It was just a giant ball that was glowing, this grey-white light. It was pulsing. Every other second it was really slow. It was like on, off, not flashing or anything, not like the strobe that we'd seen that attracted our attention. And it was kind of emitting a mist that was kind of moving around it. So my son at that point is tugging on my clothes and saying, Mummy, a hand's just come through the hedge and touched my foot. It wasn't my imagination. I saw it with my eyes. And I just turned to Steve and said, the kids are getting scared. And he said, oh, well, we better take them back inside then. Nothing about that situation is, you know, the way that we were behaving was normal. Because if he said to me he'd seen the monster under his bed, I would have looked and said, look, there's nothing under your bed. I would have proven it to him. No, the thought to look never entered my head. So off we went back into the house, where immediately, upon walking through that kitchen door, Steve went straight to the sink and started drying dishes. John and Danya went into the living room and started watching TV, and the children started playing exactly where they were when I came downstairs, like nothing had happened. Like we'd watched a few fireworks, that was the end of it, and we'd gone back inside. And I stood there and I'm looking at everybody, and I swore and said, you know, stop this, I'm going back outside. So I just went back outside by myself. Nobody said to me, don't go out there, don't go out by yourself, I'll come with you, or nothing. It was just like, yeah, all right. So I went out, walked along the length of the house. It was a good few yards, you know, away from the house. And I stood right underneath it. I stood right underneath this thing, and I was looking up at it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm kind of laughing to myself because it was like, it was just so unbelievable what was happening. You see something playing out in front of you, and, you know, and I was kind of laughing, you know, and I thought to myself, well, now what? You know, and as soon as I thought that, I heard 2 feet running behind me, and they were quick little feet, and something, whatever it was, I didn't look, I didn't see it. I just heard it was too quick. It was like boom, into my back, and then the next thing I know, I'm running, and I couldn't see, but I was already running by the time I realised that I was running, and I was trying to do these like 3 kind of bionic woman leaps from where I was straight into the house, but I didn't, obviously. I can remember seeing the steps, and I can remember seeing this, you know, the patio paved bit outside the kitchen, and then being in the kitchen, but for the rest of it, I was completely blind. And I ran into the kitchen, and I said to Steve, something's just run up behind me and touched me. And he just looked at the clock on the cooker and said, well, you aren't been out there long, so you won't have any missing time. Like that would be the most normal thing for somebody to say to you in that set of circumstances. Well, that was when my head just went. You know, I was like, right, we just shut the door. But, you know, it was literally like board the windows up. I was terrified. I couldn't go to the toilet by myself. I was making him come into the toilet with me. When I went upstairs and we were sat in the bedroom, put the children to bed, and I sat on the bed. I didn't even dare put my feet on the floor because I was convinced something would grab my ankles. You know, I was beyond any kind of sanity. And he's looking out of the window, and I knew it hadn't gone because he didn't say anything like, oh, it's gone. He just shut the curtains again. And then we all went to sleep. Then the next day, we wake up, you know, and nothing out of the ordinary apart from obviously what we'd seen. But everybody, it might have been tense the day before, but this day we were all almost fighting, you know, and everybody seemed to be taking it out on me for some reason. You know, I had John shouting at me, I had Danya shouting at me, they were being really odd, and then Steve was getting agitated with the situation, and obviously because we were close, he was taking it out on me as well. And I've always wondered about that because I know that I've had experiences from being younger, so I don't know if I was compliant or, you know, in some level that I'd coerce them or, I don't know, being involved in them being taken. But the thing is I was the only person who went outside by myself. Everyone was in the house being really normal. So basically all they'd seen was these lights and then gone back in. Now, every single person was completely traumatized by that event, even to the point where John, who was Steve and Daniel's uncle, killed himself 4 years ago because he couldn't actually reconcile what had happened. He became obsessed and he started drinking a lot, and he ended up taking an overdose of morphine and drinking loads of whiskey, and he took his own life. So, you know, I don't know why anyone would do that when I was the only person that was actually had that fear moment. But from that, obviously, I spiraled into a 10-year spin of, you know, drugs and drink and distractions, and just destroyed myself and my life, basically. So I found out that I was pregnant, and I stopped all that lifestyle and decided this was it. I was either going to die, or this was, you know, going to save me. Having my girl was going to save me. So, you know, I chose the life option. And then when I stopped taking all the drugs and drinking and everything, and I stayed in and I was breastfeeding and being a good mum and doing all the right stuff and feeling good about myself, all these memories kept coming back from things that were going on, you know, when I was a child, and a lot of things that I heard that were jokes in the family, that I used to disappear as a baby and phoning the police because I'd gone missing, and, you know, as a baby, turning up in cupboards underneath blankets with the doors shut and things like that. So it was really a catalyst, was that weekend, for an almost instant paradigm shift that I'm lucky to have recovered from.
Wow.
But then it started a whole lot of other memories.
That's mind-blowing. So where do we start with this? So you had a kind of a did you experience a classic missing time sort of thing with this encounter?
Well, people ask me this all the time, and I have to laugh and say I couldn't tell you, because for a lot of my life I've had, you know, depression and mental health issues to do with depression, and you know, and then the drug addiction. And, you know, when people say to me, have you had any missing time? I'm like, well, yeah, I've had like 10 years missing time. I remember very little of that period, really. I know I had a lot of high strange, but I don't know about missing time. I can remember as a teenager being told off for taking an hour to get home from my friends 100 yards away, or maybe a little bit more than that, really, actually. But, you know, that's the only instance, and I still can't make anything of it because I have no recollection of anything happening. So I don't have that kind of missing time thing that I could tell you about. I guess I don't really know.
So did this event impact your marriage? Is it one of the reasons why you guys loved each other?
Well, everybody fell out, actually, in that weekend. We weren't married. He was my son was too. The partner I'd split up with, I've been with him for 11 years, but we parted ways. And Steve was somebody that I was seeing at the time. You know, but it kind of ruptured everybody. And I know that Daniel and Steve, who were brother and sister, were having issues with each other, and they were having issues with John. It was like that experience happened, and everybody went off into their own little place. Steve and Daniel moved to Spain, and it took me 13 years to find them, and I found them through Facebook. It's a miracle place. And it was 13 years that I actually had to carry that on my own, you know, because I had no one to talk about it, no one to verify it or anything. And when I found out they were in Spain, and I messaged Dania and Steve, and they got back to me, and Steve rang me up, and we spoke for 3 hours on the phone. And I said to him, well, what do you remember happening? Hoping that he was going to tell me something completely different. I'd over-exaggerated everything. And he said exactly what I'd said. I said, how's it left you feeling? And he said, completely raw, stripped to the bone, exposed. You know? Mm-hmm. And like I say, nobody was outside with me. Why would anyone else who was just sat in the house feel so absolutely crushed, you know, and scarred for life by this event. So it's my full belief that something else occurred, you know, when we weren't behaving normally, so I think something was already happening to us to kind of lessen the impact of the situation that we were in. Because if you ask anybody, what would you do if you saw a UFO and it came to be about 40 feet above your head and another one landed on the floor? It'd be like, well, we'd be gone, we'd be out of there, we'd phone the police, we'd do this. What didn't we phone some friends? And that was it, and just stayed there with it, you know. So that wasn't normal. So I fully believe, because of the state of everybody else, that something else happened to us that night.
Yeah, it sounds to me like the reaction that everybody had was completely traumatic, and that they were just sort of warped back into these very normal activities.
Yeah.
And as almost like a cover for whatever took place. Have you done any hypnotic regression on this? I'm sure you have.
No, I haven't actually. I've had a lot of other experiences over the years, especially since I've been, you know, out and thinking about it and talking about it. I probably had the same amount before, but was just unaware or drunk or whatever. Sorry, what did you ask me, Ken? That's completely gone out of my head now.
I interviewed an experiencer many years ago, and this is back in the 80s, and one of the things that, I mean, he was very clear about his initial contacts, which took place for him when he was in his...
Oh, that was it. You asked me about regression, didn't you? I've not had any regression, but I've had experiences that I have got a lot of recall from, and I've not felt well enough or strong enough to go for that, because my youngest child is 5 years old, and you know, I've got a lot of support around me now, but I didn't at the time before, you know, because I was just spinning out of control and just this complete mental case that nobody could get near anyway. So you know, now I've got the support, I'm actually thinking next year I'm going to go to New Orleans and spend some time with Linda and Joe Montaldo and have some regression there for a few incidents. I just want to go to some not so scary places, to some of the memories that I have, which are not, you know, which weren't pivotal in my kind of breakdowns, which I've had quite a few. They don't last very long these days, but, you know, I've had quite a few kind of meltdowns because of the things that I've seen. So, you know, I'm going to be a little bit tentative with it and start with some things that I know were good, you know, the good experiences, because it's not all bad. I don't have all horrible things going on. And then, you know, I work towards some of the tougher stuff. I just want to know how it works. I want to see, you know, because I'm so wary of it. It gets such a bad rep, and you know, and also if I have all this recollection of seeing something that my brain is telling me not to remember, because it's better that I don't. If I have that in my head, I don't want to go back to the places that I've been emotionally and mentally, because it's taken me a long time to kind of whole and make sense of myself, you know, and kind of trying to find a place for myself in the world. And when I realised quite quickly that there wasn't a place for me, because for a start off, all of the narratives are actually written and handed to you and stuck to you like fly paper. When you have experiences and you want to try and talk about it, you don't know what's happening to you, and you feel stupid anyway, but everybody's already finished the story for you. It's like when I started talking about it, people said to me, well, you were abducted by aliens, and this is what they do when they abduct you, and, you know, and I believed all that for a while. And then as I got through doing my own research and reading and meeting people and thinking sensibly, I thought, well, actually, I don't actually know that that's true, you know, and I heard so many stories, and each one of them were just as plausible as the next. I thought, well, I don't know what to believe, so I'm just not going to believe anything. I'm just not going to take it as a belief system. I'm not going to take it on board as a fact, because I really don't know. All I can tell anyone is what I've seen, what's in my head, what I've gone through, and how I pulled myself out of it, you know. But, you know, for all of the narratives that there are, not a single one really fits. I mean, the alien thing does. It's got legs. You can go somewhere with that. But you know, I'm quite scientifically minded, but I'm not closed-minded, and I'm skeptical, but I'm not a skeptic or a debunker, obviously, because I can't be. I've seen too many strange things and had a completely, all my life, everything's been paranormal, weird things all the time, you know. I mean, as a kid, it was just normal, all of that. So I kind of grew up knowing that the world was a kooky place and not everything makes sense. So I just decided that, well, you know, maybe some of it's right. I don't think any one person is completely right. But I want to kind of like get more into how the mind works and things like that, and how things can be hidden from you, or you can hide things, you know, because I want to rule things out and see what's left. And I know that that's quite a task to take on, but doing it with ICAR and listening to all the other witnesses and their experiences, there are a lot of commonalities that mean something. You know, I don't know what they mean, but they definitely mean something. The ages that they're taken, 4, 12, you know, and in the teens, and then in the 20s, in the mid-20s, they start remembering the childhood stuff. It's the same thing that I'm hearing time over. And then when I look at child development, because obviously I've got 4 children, so I aged 5 to 21, the ages seem to tally with kind of like developmental stages in, you know, in growing up, with a kind of different hormone changes that happen even from 4 years old, you know, and then into puberty. So I just want to know what everyone else has gone through, just to see the things that match, and see if we can find something, a picture, you know, a bigger picture. It's okay looking at the minutiae and telling everybody that it's definitely this, it's definitely that, because we don't have any answers whatsoever. In this field, there are a million experts, and this field has not one single definitive answer to any of the questions anybody can ask. You know? Yeah. So I think because of that, I've got a lot of interest from the kind of like academic side of things and skeptic side of things in Britain. And at the moment, I think I'm probably one of very few, if any others, people who say that they've seen UFOs and had these experiences, that are actually entertained by the skeptics. But I've been asked to talk for them once last year, and again this year. So, you know, that's quite an interesting thing, because I don't normally want to listen, but I think it's because I haven't got a belief system. I have faith, but not a belief system, and it's not, my faith is nothing to do with aliens, you know. So,
yeah. Well,
it's an interesting.
It seems to be one of those. It seems to be one of those fields. I guess a field would be an appropriate term. A phenomena that has so much. It's so loaded with interpretation, with meaning, with mythology, because when people do have an experience or are quote unquote abducted, there's a whole mythologizing that there's a religious component to this, but then you also have kind of the, you know, the black ops side of things, and you know, are they really aliens? I mean, maybe these are actually humans that are,
you know, Robert, I have seen people in my experiences. I've seen, in some of them, I've seen men in uniform, and I know that in one, there were 2 men involved, where I saw a large kind of dark blue reptilian and a small girl who I thought was a human, actually. And I was on this class, obviously, and there's this little girl in front of me as a mother. I just saw her and went to grab her, just to pull her away from this thing, you know, and she grinned at me and her face completely changed. Now, into this golden eyes, like crocodilian kind of T-Rex mouth, definitely reptilian, covering it. No, I don't think it was a shapeshifter. I just think it pulled something out of my mind that I'd imagined, because I know that I'd imagined this girl while reading the book.
Where did you experience this?
it was in Lincoln, and there's a family called the Andrews family that live in this country, and Jason, and they are quite well-known abductees. And when I came out from underneath the stone in my mind and started going to conferences and things like that, they were the first people I met. And I went to stay at their house, and I was taken from Jason's old bedroom. I'd gone to bed, and I felt the covers actually being slid down my body, and I could hear the material. And I sort of started to wake up, and because of that, and then all of a sudden, something comes straight over the top of me, like rubber, like a rubber sheet, but it was not all on my body. It was only kind of like down to my wrist, like my arms were down by my side, but it covered my face. All of the air was sucked out of my lungs, and it completely sealed me in. And the next second, I know I'm freezing cold, ice cold, all the way through my body. Even felt my heart freeze. I didn't even have time to think that I was dead, do you know what I mean? But it was that fast. But obviously I was panicking, and my legs were kicking, and then the next thing I know, something slashed at I can breathe, and I'm taking a big, and I'm kind of in this place. I don't know where I am. I think I'm still in the house in my mind. My brain's trying to rationalise the situation, but I'm terrified, and I know that I'm drugged or something because I'm not moving very well, and I'm trying to say, help me, and I was trying to shout, help me, because in my mind I was still in their house, and there was a house full of people. I thought, if I shout, they'll come. Stop trying to move, just concentrate on your voice. And I shouted loud once, help me, and then I remember I think there's some bustling or something around me, but then I felt pins and needles in my fingers in my left hand, and I kind of looked at my left hand. It was outstretched on a steel table, resting on a blue cloth, and what I saw was a little, like, hairy thing that I first initially thought was a dog, biting my fingers. And Ellis was taken with me. Ellis was here, and he stayed in the house. He had black dogs biting on his hand. He's written dogged days about that, and
so Ellis was at the same house?
Yeah, he stayed there that night. We were taken together. We were both involved in this. Except I didn't see him in the experience, but the next day when we were talking, I got up and I came, rushing out to him and told him what had happened to me, and he told me what had happened to him, and there's a lot of commonalities. So I've got this dog biting on my fingers, and my right arm's in the air, and then to my left, sort of off to an angle by my knees, but a little further away from whatever I was laying on, was this it was just like a metal box with a glass panel in it that was stood on two tubular steel. It was like a tubular steel frame, and it was like welded to it. So these two tubular square things were the legs of it, and it had this glass panel in it with a red line that went through the middle of the glass, and I could see that a graph was being plotted on this, in this machine. And I fully believe, because of the bruises and the puncture marks on my right hand the next day that Ellis photographed, that an implant or something was definitely put into my right hand, and that this machine was monitoring some kind of nerve function through my left hand. And I also recently was watching something about astronauts and the problems of the pressurization of the suits, etc. If the suits are not pressurized properly, then the gas boils in the lungs, and to reduce this problem, you need to chill the person's body. It basically, when all the gas was taken out of my lungs when this rubber sheet came over, so the gas doesn't boil in my lungs, and my core temperature was dropped so that this atmospheric change, which is what astronauts go through, doesn't cause my body to overheat.
Right.
And I only found this out a few months ago, and I've been talking about this since 2007. It's in Andrew's book, and Ellis will back me up to the hilt on this, that I have always said that, and it was recently that I found out that gas in the lungs, boils if you haven't got the right atmospheric, conditions, and that your body overheats. So it explains why I had all the air taken out of me and why my body went so cold. How they did it, I have no idea what the technology is, But I think there were definitely people and ET involved in that one, a combination. But I've had one with just a man in uniform as well, and he said to me when I found myself sat on an orange plastic chair, bolted to a wall. It looked like the inside of a submarine or something. But it can't be because there was a light outside the door. It was like one of the submarine doors with a porthole in it with a light at the other side of it. So I don't know if it was a lift or something. He turned to me and said, "Don't worry, it won't take long to adjust." And that is all I can remember, But Melinda Leslie wrote about her MyLabs, and she drew a picture of this man in uniform that she'd seen, and it was the exact same uniform, and it is quite distinctive. So, there's things that you can say, well, maybe that was just one really crazy dream, but then when you see other people correlating something that you've seen, then, and things like that with the gas and overheating, it just kind of, over the years, things, kind of fit into place a little bit more, I think. But there is definitely, I don't know if it's military, because, a lot of people wear uniforms. Your security guard at your local 7-Eleven will have a uniform on, right up to the men who work for Bigelow into the military. So it's not necessarily military. It could be some rich corporate strange person.
Did you notice the insignia from the Trilateral Commission? Did you notice that at all?
No, this is the thing. He had his back to me. He was at a control panel, so I sat on the chair against the wall behind him, and I saw his face because he kind of half turned, but I never saw the front of his uniform, so I didn't see or the cap that he was wearing. If he had a badge on it, he didn't turn his head enough for me to be able to see it.
Well,
I don't know about.
I remember this house because I read Dog and Days, and that's wild that you were there. Did you know Alice prior to that?
Yeah. Not very well. We had, I think we met before. I know, I spent some time with Alice recently at the AMMACH conference which has gone by. It was quite weird because Ad Andrews was talking, Ellis was talking, so it was like everybody on stage kept mentioning me and that experience, he had about all his missing time and the rain and the different times when people said he turned up, but there's all kinds of weird stuff going on around that. And where we were all out in the garden, I stood next to Alice, and Alice is stood next to Paul, which is Anne's husband. I'm smoking a cigarette. They don't smoke because they're all too well behaved. And I'm just kind of looking at the floor, and this bird landed on the floor, stunned, made a big flapping, commotion, and then flew off again. And they're all going, "What the hell?" This bird had apparently flown into something that nobody could see. It was like it hit an invisible wall in the sky and just hit the deck in front of us, So there was all the whole time. There must have been something over that house that was, cloaked or whatever to do,
Yeah. Well, Ellis seems to intimate that house is a portal of some sort.
Well, I would say that it is now that family lives there.
Right.
The lost place to live.
It had to do with the family. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They've always had activity. They have had police involvement with it. All kinds of strange stuff. They had some land that they built to build a house on that they were refused, and they turned it into like a small holding where they were allowed to keep animals on it, and all the animals kept mysteriously dying, and the animals, they all died one day, all of them, and this van turned up, all the men in biological suits, blah blah blah, come to take these. It was from the ministry. They said they wanted to know what was going on, so they phoned up the ministry. They didn't know anything about it. The cattle had already gone. They were never allowed to build on that land, and eventually they just had to sell it. There's been all kinds of things, and I've been there a few times now, and every single time something strange goes on. That family is 100% genuine, and wherever they live, this kind of thing will, open up. Jason was told by one of the aliens, one of the taller greys, called, I think they call him Junus, that he was an original soul. You know, he was one of the original souls, and he, you know, he kind of helps people do, you know, he does all kinds of crazy stuff, but basically he is the focus of all of this. You know, and Anne, actually, she talks of the man in the glasses, and she woke up in a situation very much like I was in, but she pulled all of the needles and tubes out of her hands, and she saw the man because he came running over to her, tried to put them all back in her hand, so she saw his face. So, you know, and it was the same house, same family, everything. But what's really intriguing is that Anne said that she saw a lion creature with, you know, bright shining eyes. It wouldn't open its eyes because it said the human eyes cannot cope with the brightness without damage, you know. But where I come from, it's got so many suns, blah, 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 whatever. But, you know, she was explaining to us about this lion creature that she'd seen. And a couple of years ago, and this was years ago, and I'd forgotten about it, a couple of years ago, my mum was in the kitchen and she said to me, I never remember seeing this lion person once, and its eyes were so bright I couldn't even look at its face, and it was talking to me about you, but I can't remember what it said. And then when I read Anne's book again, you know, she's talking about this lion person, which I forgot about. I thought, oh my God, that means that we've all always been connected by these same ET.
Right.
Because Anne saw this when Jason was 18, which is about 12 years ago now. When I said to my mum, when did you see that? She said, about 20 years ago, which would have put me at 21. So, you know, my mum's seen this 20 years ago. Anne's seen this 12 years ago. It just so happens when I start talking about my experiences and when I go out for the first time to a conference, I meet them. And then my next major event involves them. And it completely changed the direction that was going in and everything, you know. And so I don't know if there's there's got to be something there. It's, you know, it's not common to hear of the lion people with the bright eyes. It's not a common narrative, that. So, you know, I think there's just too many coincidences for me to be happy saying, oh, it's all just, you know, chance or whatever. I think, you know, these things are long-term and generational. You know, I won't be surprised if I introduced Anne to my mum. They recognised each other, to be honest. Yeah.
There does seem to be the generational piece, and that seems to be a very concurrent thread with a lot of experiencers / abductees. Last week I had James Gilliland on the show. He talked about these lion beings. We explored this a little bit. It's an interesting.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting correlation between what you're sharing and what he shared. Have you ever been to ECETI?
I haven't. No, I would love to though. I would absolutely love to go there. Yeah. I talked to James once, well, you know, for a little while on Facebook, you know, as you do. A good few years ago now, and I think it's fascinating what's going on over there and that mountain. I have half a mind to think that it's a military thing, you know, but the other half of me is not really convinced of that.
Well, I'm sure that there's some of it. I mean, I think that the hard part with a lot of the ET and extraterrestrial stuff, obviously, and we've already touched on it, is, you know, who's who and what's what and where are they coming from, and, you know, what is the, you know, the quote unquote real deal with the whole experience. I mean, I do believe that there are UFOs. I've seen them. I've experienced them in my own way, not as dramatically as you, by the way, but I've experienced them. I saw a large, like, chrome orb in the night sky in Oakland, California one night. It was a big chrome orb. And I've
seen one of them, and I took a photograph of it as well. I'll send it to you after the show, yeah.
Oh, that'd be great. What, do you have any idea what the chrome orb is about?
I haven't a clue. I'll tell you what I was doing. I was tidying my bedroom, and I lived on the 4th floor. Well, I had this huge Victorian terrace house, and it was on the hill, and I had my room in the attic, and I was up there in the top room, and it was just this huge picture window. It was amazing, this house, and I was tidying, and I kept looking at the window, and I kept thinking, I've not got very good eyesight, so I couldn't see anything going on, but my brain was telling me something's going on, take some pictures. So I got the camera, and I started clicking away, and as I zoomed in, I saw this like little white dot and a little black dot, and then another little white dot and a black dot further on in the next picture, and then further on in the next picture. And then in the next picture, I could only see a white dot. It was right at the top of the frame. And then in the next picture, it had come right down. It was below the cloud level. It was almost central to my window, but, you know, a good few miles away. I couldn't see it with my eyes. It was when I zoomed in on the picture, I could see it. This big silver sphere in the sky with this smaller black one next to it. And then the next sort of three pictures, this black one and this silver orb are kind of changing, shifting. At one point, one of them, it looks almost like the black things are kind of triangle around the top of this orb, which is now kind of turned into a drop shape, you know, and like they're morphing together, you know. So, and I didn't even see that. It was my brain saying, take some pictures, take some pictures. I've got pictures of 3 UFOs while I was having a cup of tea at my friend's house at the bottom of the street. I looked to my right and I seen a bird. I thought it was a bird above the allotments at the bottom, you know, because they're full of mice, obviously, these red kites hover over the allotments a lot. And I looked again a few minutes later, it was still there, and I thought, well, that can't be a bird. I said to my friend Mel, I said, can you see that? And she said, yeah, I can. What is it? I went, I don't know, but it's been there ages. As soon as we started talking about it, it started moving forwards and went backwards. It went up, it went down. You know, it was moving forward in just really kind of weird, erratic, but controlled. It wasn't like a balloon or anything because it was completely flat. And then I kind of she grabbed a camera and I was taking pictures and trying to film it, but the film didn't come out at all very well. It's too blurry, you can't tell anything. But then again, when we'd only seen one, but when I'm examining the photographs, there's 3 of these things. And what we did was we watched it for ages, and it kind of was bumping along this huge cloud, and it just stopped and then went into the cloud. Later on, looking at the photographs, there's 3 of them, and one of them is a perfect disc shape. It's got like 3 little lights at the top and something at the bottom. You know, it's like, what the hell? So, you know, I see these things quite a lot, and my camera sees them as well. I've been told my subjective need to see these things makes my camera see them, which I think is quite an awesome skill.
Well, the camera sees them, and you seem to have some kind of relationship with the phenomena in order to be at least conscious enough to have these moments. I mean, it seems to me, Sacha, like you're living in an almost alternative reality at times.
Yeah. Well, I often say I'm in the world, but not of it.
Does it freak you out, or are you getting used to it?
Yeah, I think that's it. It just drove me to insanity and beyond. You know, I actually say as a little favourite quote of mine that I lost my mind and came to my senses. And I'd recommend it to everybody. You know, yeah, it was harsh. It could have been less harsh if I hadn't gone so crazy. If there was people around me that could have supported me, I might not have gone down that, you know, terrible road that I did. But at the same time, that's actually helped me be more compassionate and understanding of everybody else going down the same road, because a lot of people do. But yeah, I don't know if it's because I'm so open to it now. I never think about anything else, basically. My life is just, and I'm completely saturated with it. You know, I'm always looking at the sky, so I guess I'm going to see things because, you know, there's a lot going on up there.
Absolutely. So how do you deal with this as a mother? And you've got, obviously, a young boy. I mean, do these realities bleed through? Do you talk about it? Do you try to keep it separate? I mean, this is an interesting dynamic here.
Well, I tried to keep it separate until they started telling me things.
Right.
I don't talk about everything, obviously, but when they say something to me, I don't go, oh, don't be silly, it was a dream. Oh, don't be ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. You know, I kind of try and reason it out with them all, you know, because there's only my little boy that was scared once, but I'm kind of a little bit, you know, reticent about talking about the children's stuff publicly for various, you know, kind of social reasons.
Right, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But to be sure, this is, this is not just exclusive to me, and I it is real. I don't know what it is, and I always say that to them. I don't know what it is, but they kind of, there's nothing horrible's happened, so they, they just kind of take it in the stride a little bit like I did, I suppose, when I was younger. The paranormal aspect to my childhood, the house was all, everything, something weird going on all the time. And, I grew up thinking that was absolutely normal to everybody. So I think really that's what's going to happen with them. And, as they become older, like my eldest daughter's 13, I will talk more to her about. Obviously, there's certain things nothing anything scary, but they're kind of intrigued, and the kids today actually accept this. We're the ones going, well, when are when we're going to have disclosure, when we're going to have confirmation, la 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 la. They're like, they don't even need it. They're like, oh yeah, we know, duh. If I say something, they go, duh. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I do.
I think.
Go ahead.
It's going to be interesting. I am sort of cataloguing things for a future date when I will talk about the things that have gone on involving me, my kids, or them on their own. But right now, I kind of want to see how things are developing, because my little boy is so much different to my first boy, who's 21 now, in his quickness of mind, the way that he behaves. It's like everything, he asks for something, and it's like he thinks it's going to happen immediately, but it's not because he's a spoiled little brat.
Right.
I think it's because he's geared up already. Kids are being born now, geared up to the pace of the life that they're going to have when they're adults. It's like everything's faster, everything should be, He can read my mind, literally, the exact thoughts that I'm having, and he'll say something about it. It's freaked me out God knows how many times. I've been thinking about how can I stop these creatures coming into my house in the night. He wanders up to me and he went, "You can't stop them, Mummy." I wasn't saying it out loud. I was on my own scrubbing the toilet, in their bathroom, and I turned to him, instead of saying, "What do you mean?" I just said, "Why not?" And he went, "Because they're bigger than you," and he walked off.
Wow.
We were in separate rooms. I'm cleaning the toilet. He says that. I'm thinking, how can I make this stop? I just stood in that bathroom and I went, well, you better stop effing frightening us then, effing this, effing that. What good are they as messed up in the head as I am? Rah, 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 like this. And the next time I talked to him about something that had gone on, he went, "Oh, it didn't happen like that, Mummy," and laughed at me. So they changed his memory on my request.
Interesting.
Because he was just about to start school as well, and I'm thinking, he talks about aliens like he talks about anything. What can I do? He can't go to school because he'll just get picked on if he talks on, like he does at home.
Right. And you don't need
just changed.
You don't need the school coming home to your house either to ask you all kinds of very personal questions.
I know. I have talked about my stuff, and my mental health issues are because I saw this whatever it was in the sky with all these other people, and that's accepted. But talking about your children is a completely different matter.
Absolutely. Yeah. We had a question in the chat room about the name of the family, whose name escapes. What was the name of the family in the house that you and Ella stayed in?
If you Google Anne Andrews and Jason Andrews, you will find a lot of, there's some recent stuff she's started talking again. Jason is no longer speaking out in public. He's had too many death threats, and God, he nearly died in a car accident. Somebody hit his car. His car was like a Mitsubishi Skyliner, which is quite a big car, but it looked like a teeny tiny, Corsa or Fiesta, but the size of it by the time it stopped rolling. So he's continuing to support people in private, but he's not going to be speaking publicly. Probably, I don't know, he might change his mind he's only a young lad, he's only 30, you know what I mean? But Anne is out on the circuit, and, if anybody writes to her, she will write back to you. She's a very lovely giving woman. So there's a lot of information out there, over the years.
So let's talk about your website for a moment here. You started a website to enlighten and teach and also connect with people and give them some support for what they're going through. You've also hooked up with ICAR. Do you want to talk about your website and ICAR?
Well, ICAR is a global organisation set up by Joe Montaldo, and there's a director in pretty much well over 100 countries. It's got more members than UFOW. Most of them are contactees. It's not just about seeing UFOs. This is about contactee support. ICAR stands for the International Community of Abduction Research, and what we do is we talk to people. We have lots of questionnaires that people can fill in, and we don't ever ask your name. You don't ever have to give any personal details, and you can be really, really honest about the things that you've gone through and the things that you think, because you don't have to attach your name to it. And what we're trying to do, our aim is to data crunch people's experiences. We've done blood group studies. There's a negative blood type aspect to contactees. There seems to be a disproportionately high amount of people who are either the A negative, AB negative, whatever, or people who are contactees who have a mother who is A negative, AB negative. We do all kinds of things at the moment. There's kind of a contactee, what do you call it, like a lifestyle and a job study going on. And basically that's what ICAR do. I came into ICAR when Joe asked me to, and I said, well, I will do this. I don't want to just data crunch, because there are so many damaged people out there, so many lost souls, so many people that have felt like I have, that they need serious support. It's not fair that they go to these researchers all of the time, handing over their stories, expecting some help, expecting some answers when there are none. And the researchers, for the most part, are just, self-effacing, and they're not even bothered about the aftercare of somebody telling them and having to relive, their experiences. So there's a lot of bodies left lying around, and I just decided I was going to gather people up. And as I was talking to them, I realised, well, they have that creature, they have that kind of being, and I'll put them two together, and I match people up, so I kind of buddy people up. I talk to people completely privately. A lot of the time, people don't want to go public, which is absolutely fine, and I wouldn't even recommend it. You can get the support. My philosophy is that you can come out in hiding. You do not need to go to the internet for comfort. So, if anybody is struggling, ICAR has state directors all over America, China, India, everywhere. I'm the only one in the UK, but I still help people overseas, because most of it's online anyway. I'll meet people if I can. So basically, it's about bravery, about saying, look, I have talked about this, I've talked about this to all kinds of people in my life. And Paula, one of the women who's a very good friend of mine now, she had her job compromised because of her belief in aliens, etc. Somebody questioned her ability to do her job, and she actually fought that and won her case, and had these people in front of her who had compromised her job, and they were made to sit there and answer her questions as to why and blah and everything. She was, given a proper hearing and everything. So it's about using ourselves as examples for those people who are not as gobby as me and Paula, and say, look, we did it. This is how you do it. We'll stand right with you while you do it. They can't do this to us. And it's about having a voice, and a lot of people don't have a voice, and they are quite happy for me to speak on their behalf, quite happy for me to tell people about what they've been through but not tell them who they are, just to correlate and pull all of this stuff in, because it is an absolute mess, and it is being kept a mess, because in 20-odd years, say, for example, I read Abducted, John Mack's book. In the beginning, there's a little bit from Whitley Strieber who is saying we need a common language, blah, blah, blah. I say this all the time. We can't talk to each other because nobody knows what we're talking about because everything means something else to someone else. And this book was written in 1994, and I'm thinking, this is for a talk that I did a few months ago. It's like, my God, this has been said for over 20 years and probably more. Okay, well, it's about time we learn how to step into other people's mindsets and talk to them in their own language, and which is what I do, which is why the skeptics and the academics are kind of interested in what I'm saying, because I've learned how to talk their language. Not everybody's going to want to do that. But so it's about, I'm trying to break down these barriers. I'm trying to bridge this credibility gap, because people like me who are quite sort of cold and critical about analysis of things get lumped in with idiots like this woman who was on TV recently saying that she had an alien octopus boyfriend called Ian that she had the best orgasms and sex with, and she says on daytime TV, prime time, let's grant the abductees the 5 minutes, and they wheel out all the idiots. She's telling this guy that is interviewing her there's a cat on the sofa, a cat person sat on the sofa next to her knitting, but no one else can see it, and it's like, I get lumped in with that, and it's so far removed from anything that I am about, and pretty much most of the people that I work with. And it's about putting these definitive borders between us and the rest of it, which is something that you have to reiterate every single time you do a talk. Before I even get into the meat and potatoes, I have to make a point of distancing myself from this group, that group, blah, 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 because I don't want that sticking to me. It's hard enough as it is. Those are it's just insanity gone mental to me, is that if you are granted this time to talk to the world, why, if you were rational-minded, you would think, well, I won't tell them that because that's probably going to be a little bit hard for them to swallow. So I'll talk about this thing instead because that's a little bit more plausible. Not going straight into, I have sex with an alien that's got loads of tentacles. It's an octopus called Ian, What? It makes me so angry.
That'd be a great name for a band, an octopus called Ian. That'd be a great name. Hey, real quick, we're going to have to transition, but there's a couple of things that I did want to ask you about. We had James Gilliland on again last week, as I mentioned previously, and I asked him about the Disclosure Project and Stephen Greer, and he politely and respectfully kind of reframed his opinion on Stephen Greer, and he basically said, look, we don't have to go to an outer authority to validate our experience, and I thought that was actually a really smart way to reframe that. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I saw that you had some very strong opinions about this last round of disclosure talk in Washington D.C. What's your take on all of that and your position, and where do you think we really need to go with this kind of dialogue?
Right. Well, the Disclosure Project was a fantastic idea. It was amazing. 400 military witnesses, scientists, etc., coming out and disclosing that they had worked on this and that and the other. Stephen Greer had the idea. He founded the project. Brilliant, right? Absolutely great. But then it all goes to his head. And he now thinks that he is the Disclosure Project. He isn't anyone without those 400 people. The Disclosure Project is nothing without those witnesses. Yes, he might have been one of them, but he's only one of them. The Disclosure Project is a group of people who have disclosed. It's not Stephen Greer. And when I saw Sirius, I knew, and I got asked at a conference that I spoke at recently, what do you think of this? And I was like, well, it's just going to be one massive Stephen Greer ego fart. And I was absolutely right. It was painful to me to watch. The fact that they peddled it with the human mummified fetus, but they peddled the whole thing, which by the time you're even halfway through production, you are going to know what that is. Asking people for money to produce this thing that was entirely made of clips of things that we've all seen before, and nothing new at all. He's got some butch gay boy in shorts next to him oh, Commander this, blah, blah, blah. It was just absolute bilge to me. It was excruciatingly painful to watch. It was embarrassing. The whole thing smacked of a cult. Oh, come back, we love you. Shine your laser lights. Oh, come back. Oh, they're scaring them. Oh, my God. Shut up. Right? Stop ripping people off, charging them whatever amount of money that it is for the little party bags with a bit of cake, a whistle and a laser light. Charging them God knows how much money to go out and see things that anybody could go and see if they'd just had a pair of binoculars. I have seen things moving about in the night sky through binoculars. I didn't need Stephen Greer to help me. And that film was shameful. The tether footage, it should be written off forever. The tether, I can't believe anyone ever uses that. That tether's 15 miles long and as thin as a pencil. It's completely distorted and, with its magnification. Therefore, every single object that is moving in that frame is distorted beyond perception. You could never be able to say what any of those things were. There might be UFOs, but they're definitely not 300 miles wide. Mm-hmm. Those are like the way that it's actually blown up. These are looking like lens artifacts to me, rather than UFOs. But I know that in the other NASA footage stuff seen moving about, controlled, etc. But this particular piece of footage should be just written off forever. So that was in it. Everything. There was nothing new at all. It was just awful, and I don't know who that man thinks he is. I really don't know where he got this pedestal from that is elevated into this kind of like cult leader position.
Right.
And that's what it was. If David Koresh had thought of making that film, he might have not have had such a sticky ending. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay. Well, we know where you stand on Stephen Greer. Thank you for that. Hey, listen. If people want to listen to you, you've got your own radio show, right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. It's on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, and we are running every 2 weeks. It's called Citizen Sane Radio. We have citizensaneradio.com if you want to catch up on the archives. We have some great guests, some really good guests, actually, I'm quite chuffed about. We're also on YouTube. We've got Citizen Sane YouTube channel. You can get in touch with me on Facebook. I've got just my Facebook pages, and there's also ICAR UK, which is my Facebook group for contactees that I've just started up. And email address is sasha.icar.uk@gmail.com if anyone wants to write to me. I think that's all my advertising.
And if you're listening to the show or you're listening to the podcast, on the show page there are 2 links for Sacha. There's her website and also the link to the radio show, so you can also find those there. Well, listen, thank you for coming on. And
it's been great. Thanks.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And let's have you back on again sometime. Maybe when you've done a conference or you're just on a conference and maybe you've got some information you want to share with the rest of us. We'd love to have you back.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to come back. And thanks everyone in the chat room for your questions, and hopefully I'll speak to you soon.
Okay, very good. Okay, take care, Sacha.
And you. Thanks, Robert. Bye-bye.
All right, that was Sacha Claire-Christie, experiencer and activist. And I'm glad she's out there doing what she's doing, and I think it helps to have an open yet slightly skeptical and discerning mind when it comes to this material. Speaking of open minds, let me get on the phone here and see if I can reach my good friend, Are You Serious, and bring him into the proceedings. I met RU back in the day when I was working with Mondo 2000, and RU had already had his stellar run with Mondo and had come back into the fold to kind of help things out. And he and I bounced off each other, and we had some good moments. And I'm gonna try and get him on the air here. Let me find out. There's Che, and then we got all right. Writing with a pen that doesn't write is an actually very interesting kind of experience. So let's see if we can get RU on here. I got to dial out to him. Here we go. Let's see if we can get old Ken on. Dialing.
Your call has been forwarded to an automatic voice message system. 4159.
Let's try this other number. Hold on. Here we go. I know this is great radio. I was going to play a Timothy Leary track. Maybe I'll play that if he doesn't come through here. Hold on. All right, here we go. Perhaps the next voice you'll hear will be that of Ken Goff and AKRU Sirius. Let's dial this bad boy.
Hello.
Ken.
Hello, Robert.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Are we on the air?
We are live. You're blasting out and broadcasting to the universe.
I'm in be here now mode. You know that this is 17 years ago today that Timothy Leary said why not repeatedly, maybe 100 times, and then a little while later said beautiful, and then dropped out.
So today's the day.
Today is the day, 17 years ago.
There's a lot of really high strangeness and just bizarre synchronicities around Leary and so many other other figures that are kind of orbits in his universe. I was going through the book this morning, and I didn't realize that Leary was on Aldous Huxley's deathbed, helping him trip on the same day that Kennedy died.
Yeah, not quite. Actually, he had consulted, and then he convinced Huxley's wife to give him the LSD.
So he wasn't there, but his lawyer...
No, he was there a few days earlier, and he brought them the manuscript of the psychedelic experience, which was based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And Laura read from Leary's version of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, while Aldous had Laura inject him with 100 micrograms of liquid LSD, and then again with another 100 micrograms.
Wow! But it is that day. It was 11/22/63.
Exactly. Yeah, same day that John Kennedy was shot. And of course, Leary had a connection via Mary Pinchot. Or Mary Pinchot Meyer, if you prefer, with Kennedy.
Okay, so we're going to be absolutely non-linear with this, apparently. So I want to talk about that connection. Excuse me, we're talking with Are You Serious, who is the author of Trip Through Time, a really fast, concise, clean, and engaging read that you can find on the, is it futique.org, are you?
TimothyLeary.org.
TimothyLeary.org through the Futique group, right? These are the people that are handling Tim's archives?
This is Timothy Leary's estate, and yes, they are involved with the archives that are being dealt with primarily by the New York Public Library, which will be on public view this coming fall.
So the first time I heard about the relationship with Mary Cord Meyer, or Mary Pinchot Meyer?
Mary Pinchot is her original name, and then she was married to Cord Meyer from the CIA. Actually, before Meyer became part of the CIA, she was married to him.
So the first time I had heard about her was Mondo, and making these connections. Do you want to kind of tell people what this is about and why it's a really interesting and perhaps really important piece of America's hidden history?
It's an incredibly amazing story, and in fact, originally I read about it in Leary's autobiography, Flashbacks, which was published in 1982, And I sort of thought it was maybe a put-on and that Tim was trying to publish his book because, he was a bit of a trickster and a rascal, and I wouldn't have put it past him to do that. But it's been confirmed over and over again that this seems to be a true story, that Timothy Leary knew this woman. So basically what happened in 1961, Timothy Leary was running experiments with psilocybin and then with LSD at Harvard, psychotherapeutic experiments. And this woman, Mary Pinchot, came to see her, a very attractive woman, said she was associated with a bunch of women in Washington, D.C. who were trying to get the powerful men to turn on to psychedelic drugs, specifically LSD, that she thought that this would open their minds a bit and maybe change them from the sort of hard-ass Cold War policies that they were engaged in at the time. And she said, her lover was particularly a very powerful man. And Leary wanted to know who it was. She wouldn't tell him, but he gave her some LSD and gave her some instruction manuals that she could just as easily have ordered through the mail. And off she went. So they visited once in a while, and Mary reported success, that she had gotten her lover, who was married, to turn on, and that the women's group was doing very well. Then a little bit later, there was a spot of trouble. One of the women in the women's group had fainted, and she was upset about that, and then he didn't hear from her for a long time. In the meantime, of course, Kennedy was assassinated, and of course Aldous Huxley died on the same day. Not particularly relevant to the narrative, but interesting. Nevertheless, then in 1964, Leary tried to look up Mary Pinchot and discovered that she had been shot walking through a park in Washington, D.C., and that it was controversial. There was controversy over her murder even at that time. A poor, I believe, if I remember correctly, African-American man had been arrested for it who had been nearby. But there was already questions popping up. So she was shot, and it became clear that she had kept a diary, and somebody got into her house and destroyed the diary before it could be, read by people, outside of the agency. There was still CIA people apparently involved in that. Also, Ben Bradley from the Washington Post. And she was still very well connected and still friends with people very deep inside the establishment in Washington, intelligence apparatus, Washington Post. She was openly a visitor to the White House. It wasn't a secret that she was visiting the White House. I think it was barely a secret that she was lovers with the president.
So the inference here is that Mary Pinchot Meyer was tripping with JFK, and that JFK...
Yeah, that's the inference. And then there's a book by a woman named Burleigh. I think it was called A Very Private Woman, but you'd have to look it up. But it was about Mary Pinchot Meyer. And Burleigh was able to confirm, that she was lovers with JFK. JFK had a lot of lovers. Apparently, she was probably number one, very special to him. And that they smoked marijuana together many times, actually. And she was also able to confirm that Pinchot had a friendship, if not a relationship, with Timothy Leary. So all those connections that Leary talked about in flashbacks have been confirmed. The one thing she was never able to confirm with anybody was that they actually took LSD together. She was able to get word that from somebody, I believe a friend of Mary's, that they had smoked pot together, but unable to confirm the alleged acid trip.
Mm-hmm. Well, even pot would be enough to alter his consciousness. and see.
Yeah, I mean, it's variable. I mean, people can smoke pot and still be psychotic cold warrior. They can take LSD and still be a psychotic cold warrior. So it's variable. But there's always the possibility that he would get altered, particularly if he's in the company of a woman who wants to change his mind and increase his sensitivity to some things.
Well, it certainly adds to the conspiratorial aura of the death of JFK, and that it certainly could have been the awakening of his consciousness due to LSD that was going to shift his mandates and his priorities, and people were getting wind of that and decided that wouldn't be such a very good idea.
Yeah, the title of the section in the book, which I actually stole from Rudy Rucker, who titled the section in the Mondo 2000 book, this as well, is Did the CIA Kill JFK Over LSD? So, it's within the world of real politics, it's probably less plausible than him just getting disgusted with his intelligence agencies and the Army and with the Bay of Pigs and with the Northwoods plans that they brought to him, and there are several books about Kennedy being in conflict with the Joint Chiefs of Staff and with the Central Intelligence Agency particularly. So in the world of real politics, this is sort of a side trip, but one never knows. It could be LSD was a major factor in alienating Kennedy from his military and enforcement establishments.
Let's talk about Leary. He's such a complex character, and unfortunately, he has been turned into a caricature in some ways.
Right.
In the backwash of history, but after reading, I'm about 3/4 of the way through the download. But
right.
Going through and refreshing my memory, and he was actually a real maverick in the psychological world, the psychiatric world, and was actually doing some really important and groundbreaking stuff in the midst of all the kind of Freudian, heavy, guilt-tripping, complex-oriented psychiatry. Leary comes in and turns the whole thing on its ear, and with a real almost scientific perspective and doing a lot of modeling, a lot of research, and a lot of number crunching. He was serious at that point in time.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, and he was always serious in a playful sort of way, even to the end, as you can read in his book Chaos and Cyberculture, a number of essays on what digital culture will bring. But yeah, he was very scientific, and he was doing something. He wasn't alone in this. There was a wave of humanist psychology coming in. It's sort of a third path between the Freudians and the Skinnerian behaviorists who really just wanted to treat humans, like pets that you train by punishment and reward, And there was this third wave of humanist psychology, and there was Abraham Maslow, and there was a guy Henry Stack Sullivan, and there was Timothy Leary, and that they were probably some of the top people. Tim was just really beginning to rise up. He was a late starter in his career because he was in his late 30s, but he was among the important people doing this thing. And what he did was different from the other people in the humanist psychology world who really left behind the behaviorism and were free floating in another dimension. Tim took a little bit from the behaviorists. He wanted to use his positive reinforcement, the positive humanistic psychology, the peak experience, and all this sort of positive stuff that the humanist psychologists were talking about, but he was marrying it to behavioral change. So rather than the sort of rough and tumble of Skinnerian behavioral change, punishment and reward and getting zapped and all that kind of crap, he he was still looking for measurable results in behavior change while using the humanist psychological techniques. And he was also very strong. I mean, I think Maslow was, very outside the clinical establishment. Leary was right in there with Kaiser in the 50s, and he was right there in the middle of the clinical establishment resisting the authoritarian way that they were carrying things out. And he wanted patients. He didn't even like the word patients. He wanted what he called nervous people. People are just a little more nervous than other people who seem to be doing okay in a crazy society. He wanted them to be treated like equals. He wanted them to be in on the meetings that were discussing, how their problems should be dealt with. He was teaching his students to, go out in the real world with people and hang out with them in real situations.
Mm-hmm. Did he ever meet R.D. Laing?
He did meet R.D. Laing, actually. I think that was pretty much during the psychedelic period at Millbrook, the estate where he and his friends sort of practiced their psychedelic spiritual methods from around 1963 through 1967. R.D. Laing came around sometime during that, and as I recall the story, R.D. Laing, it was sort of an ego face-off, but R.D. Laing challenged him to try one of his exercises or something. And I think they had a good time together, really, when it comes down to it.
Yeah, they seem. I remember one time I was coming off of this island in Scotland called Iona, and
right.
There's a little ferry that goes from Iona to Mull, which is a really creepy place. And so we're coming across the ferry. We got on the bus, and and there was a guy on the bus, this old guy, and he was talking about how R.D. Laing had been on Iona a couple of weeks before and had lost his mind. He got really drunk. He got really drunk one night at the restaurant there, and there's only a couple restaurants, and one of the restaurants on Iona, and they actually had to take him off the island in a straitjacket. And I thought, wow, this is crazy. And I just thought it would be an interesting meeting between the two. Speaking of meeting, I suppose that Leary met Albert at Harvard, right? What was that like when they first met, and did they ever really reconcile at any point over the course of their lives?
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, they became friends. Albert, I think, was a full-on professor, and Leary was really just a visiting lecturer when David McClellan invited him to Harvard and told him he hoped he would stir things up, which is, a bit of historical folly, probably from the establishment's point of view. He was just thinking about his moderately radical psychological views, and not that Leary would drop psilocybin a few months later or a year later. But Albert, who became Baba Ram Das, was there at Harvard as a professor, and they just hooked up and became friends. They both had a bohemian characters. They weren't shy about enjoying socializing and liking to party, and so on. Leary wasn't worried about Albert being gay, and that they were not exactly hipsters or anything. They were still relatively straight compared to countercultural people of the 50s. But they were kind of the bohemian guys in the office complex there, who where graduate students come in and find some guys hanging out with the jugs of wine and just sitting around talking and rapping until after hours. So they were immediately buddies. And then Tim got his hands on the psilocybin in Mexico in 1960 during summer recess, and Albert was right there, ready to follow on. And Albert was already a pot smoker, so it wasn't like Dick Albert was total straight guy. So yeah, I mean, they were a team really, and in some sense, there's Ralph Metzner. They were kind of a trio there at Harvard, and they stuck together. They moved on together. They tried to set up an exile community twice actually, once in Mexico and once somewhere else, I forget. But they ended up at Millbrook together for a very long time, and then they sort of had a split. I mean, they kind of had a bum trip together. I think it is where the split happened, pretty much in the mid-'60s. And, of course, Albert famously went to India and surrendered to a guru and became Baba Ram Das. Larry went to India, sort of half-assedly tried to surrender to a guru, and the guru told him, no, your job is to be a Western intellectual. Go back and weave these patterns for people. And that's what he did. So they became alienated from each other as Ram Dass became increasingly devoted to sort of the Eastern model, and Leary very much, I mean, he incorporated aspects of it, but he very much abandoned the Eastern model and returned to Western models of science, with glimmers of what we call the occult, of magic, and that sort of thing. So there were kind of pot shots being tossed in their public comments at each other until Harvard, actually, believe it or not, 20 years, I think, 20 years or 25 years after kicking them out, I think it was 25 years, brought them back together again to speak at Harvard. And immediately, whatever differences of opinions they had didn't matter. They were great friends, and they were great friends for the rest of their lives. And I know that Timothy's wife, Barbara, really liked Baba or Das, Ram Das, Richard. They called him Richard, and he accepted that. And that Zach, his stepson, he was just a favorite at the house. And Ram Dass has a great sense of humor, and so does Timothy. So, no small disagreements about cosmology were going to keep them from being friends.
But it's really fascinating how they both kind of camped out in two distinct, different zones. Ram Dass really kind of a right-hand path, seva, service, and Tim staying in the left lane of life for almost up until he took his last breath. I mean, it's fascinating how they polarized and kind of had these, parallel but pretty disparate experiences around their lives.
Yeah, it's true, actually. Well, I mean, Timothy was always maybe a bit more bohemian right from the start. I mean, if you look at his career, you say, oh, here's this guy who got in trouble with authority right from the start. He got in trouble in college with authority. He got trouble when he tried to go into West Point with authority. But he didn't get in trouble with authority because he was, trying to be a good guy or a protester or objecting to anything. He got in trouble for hedonism. He got in trouble for sneaking into the girls' dormitory and staying the night in college, and he got in trouble for leading a drinking party off campus at West Point. So I mean, that's an element of Timothy's character, that he was a hedonist, and Dick Albert Ram Dass was a bit of a hedonist, but he also had the responsible side to him, sort of grounded and tied to the earth. And I mean, it's pretty well known that Dick Albert sort of tried to raise Tim's kids because Tim was not taking care of the responsibilities of being a father that well during the heyday of the 60s, because he had greater demands being made on him, to sort of be the leader of a social and spiritual revolution. So it's kind of difficult on the family, but those are two different characters.
Yeah, it's again, in reading the narrative here that you've just published, Trip Through Time, a memorial of Tim Leary in his life. It seems as though history almost chose Leary. I mean, obviously, he fuels things along with some very provocative statements. He has some really interesting moves that he makes in terms of turning on celebrities like Charlie Mingus and Ginsberg and some other folks. But there's this larger-than-life kind of energy or zeitgeist that seemed to almost pick him up at times and move him along with the current of history. Did you ever get that sense with him?
Totally. I mean, that's exactly what happened. And then there's this funny sort of thing now, as history sort of recedes, the actual facts of history recede and the myth takes off, that Tim sort of started the hippie movement or whatever, and Tim was swept into these things as much as he, started these things. If you read his books, if you read his biography and his sort of quasi-autobiographical books like What Does Woman Want and so forth, you can see, on the one hand, he likes to portray himself as almost like an alien, a space alien arrived on a mission to mutate the human species. And on the other hand, he totally portrays himself as sort of a hapless guy who keeps on getting sucked up into these strange occurrences. He gets sucked up into the absolute center of American history and American politics. I mean, the idea that he would happen to land in the county, in the upstate New York county, where G. Gordon Liddy happens to be the assistant DA, and that G. Gordon Liddy would become really fanatical about busting his Timothy Leary's quasi-commune in Millbrook, and that Gordon Liddy would then impress President Richard Nixon that Richard Nixon would bring him into the White House as an advisor and task Gordon Liddy with creating the Drug Enforcement Agency. I mean, how central, and then Nixon would call him would call Leary the most dangerous person in America, or the most dangerous person on earth, or whatever it was. I mean, how central to history can you get than that? And I mean, he didn't plan that. He didn't plan to move Gordon Liddy, move these chess pieces around. He was moved by the chess pieces, unless something exterior, some other force is involved here. There's a great train of coincidence or synchronicity in Timothy Leary's story. Just an enormous. One could probably draw it out visually. I mean, and then to have the association also with Mary Pinchot and Kennedy. It's pretty extraordinary.
And then you've got this whole other thing, the weirdness with the Weather Underground and being sprung by Bill Ayers and then taken to Algiers where he hangs out with Eldridge Cleaver. And, I mean, how strange is this? And in a really nostalgic kind of way, Ken, it's like, it's too bad that stuff like this doesn't happen anymore. Like, reality has become so, or consensual reality has become so grimly predictable, right? And
that's true.
Yeah, and back then you had like Cleaver and Leary hanging out in Algiers. That was such a strange deal.
Yeah. I mean, there is a kind of hyper reality to the late '60s and early '70s that can probably never be surpassed. And I think the fact that there was a lot of psychedelics going around and going around openly and being taken in large collective groups kind of raised the energy level and the weirdness level and the cosmic coincidence level up to a fever pitch. Plus you had the war in Vietnam going on, which was despite everything that has gone on since then, was the most violent American war, at least since the Civil War, I believe. So you had all those things, cropping up, and then but it's also, it's another example where Leary stumbles into a historical situation because he's in jail. He can't discuss really how his escape is being arranged. And so without him really knowing, the Weather Underground is, which is considered by the feds and by the National Security Agency as a major terrorist group, ends up being involved in getting him out of the country, deeply involved in getting him out of the country. Without him, so there he stumbles into, quote, the revolution, unquote, in which, a certain segment of America's radical left, actually thought that there was going to be armed takeover of the United States by the new left. And he ends up in exiled Black Panther headquarters in Algiers, Algeria, with Eldridge Cleaver, who is kind of going nuts at that time. And he's actually becoming too extreme for the Black Panthers and Huey Newton, who at that time.
Oh, it is Ken? Oh, man. Got to get you back on here. Come on. All right, let me do this. Let me dial him back in again. It's just getting good. All right, so just hang in there. We're going to try and connect back up with our guest, Ken Goffman, a.k.a. Are You Serious, regaling us of tales with tales of Timothy Leary. Let's see what happens here.
Hello?
Hey.
Hi, you lost me there. When did you lose me?
I lost you. Eldridge Cleaver was just getting weird and getting too extreme for the Black Panthers, and Huey Newton was getting nervous about him.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I ended, so we haven't lost much there.
So he goes there, and Cleaver's losing his mind, and it's really a very strange kind of miscegenation of radical black separatist politics and this lily white Harvard intellectual who's into just peace and love and tripping and feeling good. And it went okay for a while, but then Cleaver put him under house arrest. I mean, come on, how weird is that?
Yeah, the whole scenario is very weird, and I mean, it's funny to read Cleaver's point of view because you can sort of understand it. I mean, they're under heavy manners there. The Algerian government is really, I mean, it's a Muslim country, that they're not too happy having the legendary LSD professor. That's not really their cultural milieu, sexual revolution and psychedelic revolution and hedonics. So, Cleaver's kind of trying to balance this out, and then at the same time one of Leary's friends shows up trying to smuggle in millions of hits of LSD. He wants to turn on Africa. So, yeah, I mean, you can sort of understand it from Eldridge's perspective. And at the same time, Cleaver is in a very nasty state. There's no question about that. And there's pretty strong rumors that he murdered a fellow Black Panther for having an affair with his wife, Kathleen. They'd gone over to North Korea, and they were kind of worshiping at the foot of Kim Il-sung. I mean, it was very strange. And basically, Tim and Rosemary, his wife, they wanted to carry on, what they were accustomed to, which was getting high and feeling good. And Eldridge wanted to organize a revolutionary communist army, and it wasn't working out. So they made Tim wash dishes a little bit and do office work and things like that, which maybe that's a cool thing for Tim to learn. But eventually, they put him under house arrest, but not very well. And Leary was able to get away. And he went to the Algerian government, and the Algerian government was pissed at Cleaver because globally word had gone out that, the Black Panthers had put somebody under arrest in their country, which, isn't cool by the leaders of a nation state. So they were willing to protect Tim from the Panthers long enough to push him out of the country. They didn't want him there.
So did he go to Switzerland after that?
Yeah, I mean, he was handed, he and Rosemary were handed passports under their real name at a time when they were wanted by Interpol and U.S. law enforcement and even the White House was busy. John Mitchell was calling Algeria personally to try to get him back, and they were about to be busted. They're going to be grabbed actually, someplace I think it was in Copenhagen, but I'm not remembering clearly. No, it might have been. I can't remember, but it was in Switzerland, I think, actually, and they were waiting to be grabbed. A radical group had invited them to speak, but Interpol was aware of it, and they were waiting to grab them. And then there was a stop-off at another airport, and somehow word got to them, and there was somebody there who was willing to take them in, and an outlaw who was willing to take them in. And I mean, this was a completely rogue character, Michel Hoissard. He was, he had associations with the French resistance from World War II. That's how the connection was made. But Hoissard was, interested in. He was, you'd sort of. Leary called him Goldfinger. He was like your James Bond gangster, gold runner or gun runner, and so forth. So he was taken in by this weird character, and lived in luxury, semi luxuriously in Switzerland with this dude. But he would also be taken into custody every once in a while with Switzerland while they debated whether to turn him over to the American authorities or not. So it was this very weird and nebulous situation.
And he actually partied like a rock star with it too. Like he hung out with Warhol and Keith.
Yeah, I mean, it was 1972, 1973, and this was the period to say fuck it and party. So that was what he did. Yeah, Warhol was visiting, and he hung out with Warhol, and yeah, I mean, there was massive amounts of psychedelics and weed and drinking and coke and even a brief heroin period. And yeah, he was carrying on like he was Mick or something.
And Warhol confided in Leary that he had interest in the work of Crowley, and by this time, Leary had kind of taken on this Crowley-esque persona, and there's some really interesting synchronicities with him and Crowley. In fact, the picture where he's taking, is he in front of the Great Pyramid or the Sphinx in Egypt?
Yeah, he's posing. He's on a horse and he's holding a sword up in the air in a certain way, and it conflates pretty much precisely with a picture that Crowley had taken of himself. And Tim didn't know this. This Englishman, Brian Barrett, who had been sending manuscripts to Tim for a long time, came to visit him first in Algiers, where he had all kinds of trouble with the Panthers, but was still able to hang out some. And then in Switzerland, he came and stayed with Tim, and he was a Crowley fanatic. And he was able to point out, that Tim had done a number of specific things that Crowley had done. And then he took him to climb a mountain that Crowley had climbed, and naturally did it on acid. And, wearing high heel shoes. This was the, sort of hipster style of the time, and they managed all that. So, yeah, he was, Brian Barrett, the Englishman, was very much responsible for Leary becoming sort of really intrigued by Crowley's life.
Mm-hmm. And so it wouldn't be complete if Leary didn't have a connection with another slightly Crowley-esque character in Charles Manson, whom he hooked up with in Folsom. What was that all about?
Yeah. Well, so once he got nabbed finally after escaping jail and being in exile for, I think it was about 2.5 years, maybe 3, he got nabbed in Afghanistan. I mean, there's a great historical connection. At that time, Afghanistan is a kingdom, and is actually probably a lot more loose and free and wealthy than it is now. But anyway, he gets the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. Well, that's a whole other story. But friends of Leary's, are smuggling hashish out of Afghanistan, which is why they think they have a connection there that can protect them. But they get nabbed. He and his girlfriend Joanna Harcourt at this point get nabbed in Afghanistan, and Leary is dragged back to prison. And this time the prison authorities don't treat him very nicely, so he's shoved down into the lowest section of Folsom Prison, which is considered the worst section of the worst prison at that time. Was it Folsom? Anyway, you'll have to read the book because, I'm not remembering everything, but I think it was Folsom. He discovers that his next door neighbor is Charles Manson. This guy has one of the prison guards send over a couple of books. One of them is In Search of the Miraculous by, was it Bennett? The Gurdjieff follower, Ouspensky, by Ouspensky. Yeah. So they start having conversations. And Manson basically, Manson was a power freak, much more so than Tim was, and couldn't understand why Tim didn't sort of consolidate his power with the counterculture and sort of give orders, give commands to people to make, the revolution happen or whatever. So, they conversed frequently, and, Manson, Tim was kind of impressive at times, and then, he would become really tiresome because he'd spent his whole life being a prisoner, even as a kid, as a child. And so a lot of time was, a lot of Manson's narrative was just sort of low-level self-pity and, invective against those who had abused him all during his entire life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely fascinating stuff. When did you first meet Tim?
I met him in 1980 in Rochester, New York. He was doing something he called the Stand-Up Philosophy Tour. Not that long after he had gotten out of jail. I guess it was about 4 years after he had gotten out of jail. So he came there, and it was really kind of a comedy act. It wasn't great, to be honest. It was okay, but it wasn't great. But afterwards, myself and some friends surrounded him, and we were doing an avant-garde art magazine. We wanted to interview him, and he was just really friendly. And we went into a restaurant that was in the same nightclub. And Tim, in a lot of ways, Tim was like having darshan with the guru, particularly at that point. You would come away feeling the buzz for several weeks just from having hung out with him. He had this incredibly infectious joie de vivre. He just really made you feel like the world was a party, and he had let down the velvet rope and had let you into it. It was really kind of extraordinary. He was very infectious in that way. Maybe not as you couldn't rely on it as much later in his life. But hello?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Hello? Okay, but it was still there sometimes.
Yeah. How did he feel later in life about where the world was headed? Did he become cynical at any point along the way?
He became cynical in the 80s for a little while, sort of cynical, a little bit cynical after the election of Ronald Reagan. He was so overconfident. He really thought that the counterculture had won at the end of the 1970s. It hadn't been the hard-ass revolution that some people had been predicting, but, there was a kind of pot-smoking liberalism that had conquered the country, and Jimmy Carter was president, and Jerry Brown, who was kind of hip at that time, was the governor of his state, California, and, if you looked at the mainstream media, you sort of saw the acceptance of a lot of the ideas that had been pushed by the hippie culture, including ecology, including sexual freedom, including yoga, and all the sort of various alternative methods for consciousness and medicine. All that stuff was buzzing around at the end of the 70s. So I think Timothy had a big shock when Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980. And so he wrote some pretty tough political commentary during that period. But I think he felt, the 90s were a strong countercultural time. And so I think he felt once again that, and the early days of the World Wide Web and the net, basically felt like a complete democratization of thought and ideas. So I think he once again, he was lucky in a sense that he could leave at a time where he felt like we had won or we were on the verge of winning once again.
It certainly felt that way, and that kind of bleeds into the whole Mondo experience, and that was a time and I'm sure you've heard this from all the people you've run across over the years with Mondo, that they were magnetized to California, they were magnetized to the Bay Area by Mondo. They wanted to be a part of it. They didn't really fully, completely understand what it was, but they had their ideas about about the mythology of Mondo and everything that was going down. And even in my own way, in my own experience, even though I came late to the party with Mondo, it was a period of time where things really seemed incredibly positive and possible. And then the whole thing, not Mondo, but the times themselves became extremely commodified and corporatized, and the internet, where it is now. And it's kind of like the inevitability of history. But at that time, during the first 5 years of the 90s, that was quite a ride, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah. And I think it's kind of like a seesaw, it's whether it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or 1 step forward and 2 steps back. I guess we'll find out one day. But the world just seems so full of possibilities. And I think even into the end of the 90s, as you started getting more corporatized and you had the long boom, the so-called long boom, which led to a crash, even there, it was almost like the corporate culture was dipping into the utopianism of the hippie culture. And, maybe we could work it out. But then it became clear that due to a whole bunch of circumstances, maybe largely, primarily, the way in which very fast communications interaction feeds finance and lifts it away from actual production and real wealth. A whole other thing was developing. This sort of massively plutocratic situation was developing, and the Bush was coming in and all that.
Right. And we had 9/11, and that was an intensely dark period, and still has really not let up in some ways. How's the Mondo project going?
Well, it's coming. I've got a bunch of chapters written, but I want to go back in and work on it a bit more. So, it's been more difficult than I thought it would be, but it's definitely going. And you've told some great stories. You've told some of my best stories, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, in terms of the dramatic period, you're there at a very, the heyday of Mondo, where I was sort of in, where we were doing pretty well. There's drama there, but there's far less drama than there is with the sort of end game.
The wind down was intense and not for the faint of. So
hello?
Yeah. That was the blog talk. So we're gonna go over just a little bit here, just by a few minutes, in case you're listening on the live stream. I just want to end this off in a proper fashion, as they say, with Are You Serious? You're listening to the Friday Farcast. So why has there not been a film made about Leary? Why hasn't Oliver Stone drafted you to write a script about a film on Larry?
I don't know why that is. I mean, there are, a few, what's the word I'm looking for? There's Timothy Leary's Dead, which is a sort of an okay documentary. But, yeah, nobody has done it. It's been around for a long time. There have been a number of false starts where, Leonardo DiCaprio owns an interest in the story. What's his name? The guy who did Pi and the wrestler Darren Aronofsky. Yeah, I think he would do an interesting version of it. He's shown an interest in doing it. There've been a number of, the various, the Leary's own book, Flashbacks, has been optioned. The fairly terrible biography by Robert Greenfield has been optioned. And there are a number of scripts going around, but for whatever reason, this hasn't happened. I think it's pretty hard to compact it all into a couple of hours, but I think it could be done. And it's incredibly cinematic. His life is usually cinematic. I mean, there's that one instance, which I don't know if you've gotten to that point or not, where he's actually thinking about a second armed escape from prison, and the circumstances come up where he actually has a gun in his hand, and his girlfriend has a gun in her hand, and they're in the back seat with a couple of FBI agents, and Leary decides he just can't do it. I mean, but there are incredible cinematic moments in his life.
It sounds to me like it would be really perfect for HBO, where you could have a whole season like Deadwood, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, that would make a great season.
Out. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Hey, Ken, if I'd known you were this good of an interview, I'd have had you on a long time ago.
Well, let's do it again when I have something else up.
So when the Mondo project comes to life, let's have a Mondo kind of rally here. And you'll be the point man for that, okay?
Sounds great, man.
All right. Well, listen, have a great weekend, and thanks for doing this work on Tim. It's Timothy Leary's Trip Through Time. You can find it at timothyleary.org, and you can find our friend Are You Serious all over the internet. He was practically
that's spelled SIRIUS, by the way.
He was practically one of the fathers of the internet. He's been here really from the jump. So find him and tap into the rich history and narrative that's associated with him and the stuff that he's been involved with, because it's intimately tied with American history too. All right, thanks a lot, Ken, and you have a great weekend, okay?
You too. It's been a lot of fun. Talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, so if you're listening now, you've been listening to Danger Rangers, Strange Attraction, and all the stuff that goes along with it on a great Friday Farcast. I'd like to thank Sacha Claire-Christie and Ken Goffman, a.k.a. Are You Serious, SIRIUS. And I'll be back next Friday with Rad Chick from Portland, Oregon, talking about the dangers of radioactivity and the fallout from Fukushima. And in the second hour, we'll probably have John Trudell back on the show and getting into the latest updates in his work to help legalize hemp. Until then, use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. You've been listening to the Friday Farcast, and here is Philip K. Dick.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.